Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's live online program titled Medieval Manuscript Culture and Production. This is a live online presentation by Kathryn Brunet. And if you are here for this lecture, you're in the right place. So just sit back and relax, be a little patient. We'll be starting in a minute or so. We're just letting in folks from the waiting room now. So again, sit back and relax, be patient. We will start shortly. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. I'm back. Back to welcome you to the Book Club of California's live online program titled Medieval Manuscript Culture and Production. We will be getting started in just a moment. A couple more people are still coming in from the waiting room, but we will be starting in just a moment. So again, sit back, relax, and be patient. We'll be starting in a moment. All right, it's a couple of minutes past the top of the hour, and we have an exciting program for you. So we are going to get started. We will let people join us as we're in progress. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's live online program titled Medieval Manuscript Culture and Production. Again, it's a live online presentation. It's a webinar by lecturer, paleographer, and special collections librarian Kathryn Brunet. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the executive director for the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and host the webinar this evening. Tonight, we have more than 225 people registered for this presentation. So for those of you who might be new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit, member and donor supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with a focus on the literature and history of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We also host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, and much, much more. So if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed, and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest, but the benefits are many. And we simply cannot do the work that we do without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit our website at bccbooks.org to join or donate to the book club. And now for tonight's program and our presenter. Again, the program is titled Medieval Manuscript Culture and Production. It is a live presentation by lecturer, paleographer, and special collections librarian, Kathryn Brunet. Now, Kathryn Brunet is a rare books and special collections librarian focused on primary source literacy and the history of the book education. Originally from Indiana, she moved to Los Angeles in 2012 and graduated in 2020 with a master's degree in library and information sciences from UCLA. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in telecommunications with minors in history and theater from Indiana University, Bloomington. She also has a professional certificate in rare books and manuscript studies from the California Rare Books School. She teaches and delivers lectures and workshops on the paleography and production of Western European medieval manuscripts and early modern books. She's also a research assistant for a grant-funded medieval manuscript project at the University of Southern California. Now, tonight, Kathryn will explore the physical materials, the production processes, ownership, and readership of medieval manuscripts from 800 to 1500 in Western Europe. You'll hear about and learn of parchment making, medieval ink and pigment ingredients, methods for illumination and decoration, and the culture of Scriptoria with a special focus on women scribes because March is Women's History Month. She will also be sharing digitized script and decoration in European manuscripts as well. Now, if you have questions for our presenter, you can use the chat and the Q&A functions in Zoom. We can take questions throughout the presentation, especially on the sections where we're viewing some of the manuscripts on screen. So you can definitely jump in there, ask a question. I will kind of look at those and I might interrupt Kathryn and ask them so we can ask your questions while we're looking at the manuscripts. We also should have time toward the end of the hour to take more questions or look at some of those questions in more detail, and we'll curate those from the chat and the Q&A. Okay, so now it's my great pleasure to introduce Kathryn Brunet and pass over the controls for tonight's webinar. Kathryn, it's all yours.
Thank you, Kevin. Hello, welcome to this webinar on medieval manuscript culture and production. As Kevin said, my name is Kathryn Brunet, and today we're going to explore the design and physical production of medieval manuscripts in Western Europe. So first, let's take a look at the word manuscript. In Latin, this literally means handwritten, manuscriptus. In the medieval period before the printing press, Europeans made every book individually, copying the text, decorating, sewing the bindings, everything by hand. And as you will learn today, this process was extremely labor-intensive. Styles and materials to make manuscripts varied considerably depending on the location, time period, and purpose of the book. Let's start with discussing the type of materials historically used to make medieval manuscripts in Europe. From the years 500 to 1500, medieval European manuscripts were made primarily using parchment as the writing support. Paper for bookmaking would become more common in the West over time, with paper mills being established first on the Iberian Peninsula and in Italy, gradually making their way up to Northern Europe by the 1300s. Parchment was far more commonly used for medieval European documents before this time, and we'll be focusing on parchment today in the documents we look at. Excuse me. Parchment is a term specifically used for a writing surface made of animal skin. Excuse me. Parchment is a term specifically used for a writing surface made of animal skin, usually goat, sheep, or calf, that is prepared with the goal of being a smooth, even writing surface. Traditionally, people have always used animal skins for writing, but parchment is an advanced form of preparation that makes a clear, consistent writing surface. First, as you can see on the left, the skin would be soaked in a lime solution to loosen the fur, and then it would be scraped off. In this picture on the left, a medieval tanner is scraping the hide to prepare for leather making, which would have had a very similar initial process as parchment making. After the fur was removed, the wet skin would be stretched on a wooden frame, like you can see in this center image, which is the modern interpretation of the process. To prevent tearing, small stones called pippins would be placed at the borders of the skin, and then twine would be wrapped around the pippins and tied to the frame. The wet skin was stretched really tight, and the parchment makers would use a curved knife called a lunellum to clear away any hair or debris and scrape the surface clean and smooth. This scraping process is depicted on the right, in the image on the right. As the skin dried, the frame would be adjusted to keep the skin very tight and stretched as thin as possible in a process that could take days of work. It would also be rubbed with powders and paste to ensure that the ink would adhere to this surface and not run. After this preparation, it would be cut into pieces for bookmaking. Parchment can be made extremely thin and fine, and if you ever get a chance to touch parchment, I think you would be surprised at how soft and smooth yet sturdy it is. It has a very durable and resilient quality, and it gives remarkable resilience to age and deterioration if it's stored properly. Even after enduring the preparation process, parchment retains a different appearance from one side to the other. On the side that once had fur, it is referred to as the hair side, appropriately, and it's often slightly darker in color. And there's sometimes evidence of hair follicles on this hair side. On the other side of the parchment, which would have faced the inside of the animal, is referred to as the flesh side, and this is commonly the whiter, clearer side. You may be familiar with the term vellum and how it relates to parchment. There's a variation on how these terms are used, but generally speaking, parchment refers to all animal skin that is prepared in this way that we just discussed, as a writing medium, while vellum is used to describe a very fine quality of parchment, usually made of calf skin, commonly accepted as the finest quality of skin for manuscript making because of its very clear white appearance. As you may expect, not all parchment is in a perfect state, and as it is made of organic material, holes and tears were part of the process, caused by the stretching or biting insects or blemishes in the skin. This is organic material, it's a livestock skin. So sometimes these flaws were sewn up with colored thread or made into decorative elements, and scribes would just write the text around it, around these obstacles, and it wasn't worth wasting parchment if there were some minor inconsistencies. Here you can see examples on both sides of disguising holes and tears in parchment with colorful thread and sewing decorative sewing designs. These are really beautiful. They almost look like crocheting, the way that they've embroidered into the parchment. And at first, you may sort of think of parchment as paper, but parchment is so much stronger than paper that you are able to sew with it. And parchment was used for other things besides books because it is very durable. Here's some more examples of holes in parchment. On the top left, you can see a very small hole, and the scribe just hopped over it and kept writing. The bottom left is a much more decorative design, 2 colors of thread, very pretty for a bigger hole. And then my favorite on the right here, there was a tear in this parchment, which was sewn up, and then a scribe used a little ink drawing of a man on top of it, who is interacting with the text, pulling the blue ink of one of the initials, just to keep your eye off of the tear and be more immersed in the character instead. Large books with many parchment pages could require an enormous amount of animal skin, and the use of parchment was very expensive. This image here shows how few pages an animal skin may provide, depending on the size of the skin and the size of the book. Books in medieval Europe were not everyday objects the way they are today, and every copy had to be specifically ordered from a scriptorium, a place where highly skilled workers made these books by hand. Bound manuscripts in the Middle Ages were usually owned by upper classes, universities, religious institutions, and the government. And this image here shows from the top left a piece of parchment from one skin, and if this is a larger book, maybe you only get 4 rectangular leaves out of it, you would fold those in half, and then you could start your decoration, and we will explore all of these processes in the next few slides. After parchment was cut into sheets for, I skipped one here. Sorry, there you go. After parchment was cut into sheets for a manuscript, there were 2 more necessary steps that were needed to be done before the page could be written on. The first thing the scribe would do with a new sheet of parchment was to prick the edges. Pricking means that the scribe would make tiny holes all the way down the sides of the parchment, spacing out to designate where the lines of text would go. These holes were probably made by a sharp instrument like an awl, a sharp calipers, a spiked wheel, or a knife. And sometimes pricking is trimmed off in the final binding process, so it's not always visible. And over time, if books are rebound, the trimmed edges may cut off pricking. So pricking doesn't always survive to a modern book that we're looking at today.
Kathryn, let me jump in here before you move ahead, because there's a couple of questions about parchment.
Oh,
and
great.
how parchment is made. So one question is, what powders and pastes were applied in the tanning process?
So tanning is specifically for leather. So I used an image of a tanner because it was a medieval image of a very similar process of scraping the fur. But tanning is a specific process just for leather. So we wouldn't use that when we describe parchment. But the powders and pastes that are required for parchment are applied a little bit later, after all of these soaking and scraping processes are. They would use some kind of calcium, some kind of chalk perhaps, anything to whiten it and to smooth it out. Oftentimes a pumice stone or crushed pumice could be rubbed on a piece of parchment as it was drying out to make it very smooth and very white, to get rid of any of those impurities or blemishes on the surface.
And was that also used, were there pastes and powders used to improve ink adherence, or is it really just?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. There was also some kinds of powders mixed, to help with the absorbency of the page, because it is an organic material. It's going to bleed a little. So you had to treat the parchment in a various amount of ways to make sure that ink didn't run everywhere. It has to stay tight for writing.
I feel like we could talk about parchment all day, but two other
Oh,
questions,
it's great.
because other questions are coming in, and this is actually fun to pick them up as we're looking at them, as you
Absolutely.
suggested it would be. So is parchment still being produced today for this purpose?
Yes, in a very limited capacity. If you could imagine how many animals are needed to make a book. Um, you can actually take a parchment workshop. There are parchment making classes that are offered in the United States and probably in Europe as well. It's a very messy business. It's very smelly as well. As you can imagine, treating animal skin is going to be very hands-on, but also very smelly. So I do warn you, if you're interested in this, you're gonna have to have a strong constitution, but it can be done. And there's lots of blogs written about people who have done this in modern times, in the past century or so, trying it out for themselves to see what it was really like. And it's pretty cool. That center image I had of the parchment being stretched, that skin being stretched, that's from a workshop that was done not long ago. So it can still be done. Usually parchment is made for specific artists. At this point now, parchment is so rare and not really needed that it's mostly just for artists who want to make parchment for an art piece, or a specific workshop. You can't really mass produce it, and there's not really that much of a need for it at this point.
So one last parchment question, and then we have two questions about what's on the screen right now. So was parchment bleached? I mean, you mentioned chalk and other whitening thing, but was bleach a thing?
I think I have read about bleaching. I think there's a lot of different recipes for how you make parchment. I'm using a very generalized recipe. What I'm sharing with you, I definitely can stress that all of these processes would have varied depending on where the parchment maker lived, and what was available, because you're not going to import expensive things that you could get a different local version of instead. So I have read about a bleaching process. I don't personally know what went into that, but I think that was another way to get it more white and more clear for writing as well.
Okay, so now this page, or the screen that we're seeing here,
Yeah.
the pricking process. Someone
Mhm.
mentions that they've heard about templates being used to
Mhm.
help with the pricks, I guess. Is that a thing?
I haven't seen a template before. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I think there's lots of ways we could guess that they did this, because it's an action that doesn't really have a lot of visual representations of the person actually doing it. There's a lot of guesses as how they did this. The pricking wheel you can see on the right here was invented a little bit later. So before that, it really was done by hand. It was my understanding that they would prick more than one at a time, that you would stack them and you would prick a few pieces, or maybe many pieces depending on how you could cleanly do it, that you wouldn't be going through every single page and doing this. A template sounds like a great idea. I mean, these people were very efficient and very smart at what they were doing, so I imagine they found a very efficient way to get this done as quickly as possible and get to the writing.
Great. Okay, now we'll let you present a little more. If there are more questions come up, we'll get to those.
So after parchment was cut, after pricking was done, the scribe would use a dry point, like a stylus or point of a knife, or a lead point to draw the lines for the text, the borders, and decorations. This process is called ruling, and evidence of ruling was not removed after this manuscript was finished, so we can easily see how scribes planned out their pages. The larger the margin, the more expensive the manuscript because it was using more parchment for each page. I'll give you a second. That's a quicker slide, but if you have questions about ruling, we'll see lots of examples of ruling today. This one's a darker example, so it's very obvious what ruling is. It sort of looks like notebook paper, these vertical and perpendicular lines in here. And it's just a grid to put your lines on so everything is straight and even. And I put my slides out of order and I just noticed, so I'm going to skip back 2 and we're going to talk about scribes here. So now that we have something to write on, what do we use to write with? By the 500s in Europe, scribes would have primarily used feather quills, usually from geese and swans, to write their books. Penna is Latin for feather or wing, which is where we get our modern word for pen. There were particular feathers plucked for their use as quills, and the 5 flight feathers on the outside edges of their wings are best for quills because of their length. Scribes would sharpen quills to keep their nibs very neat and even and make those very beautiful ink lines. And scribes are often pictured with a quill in one hand and a pen knife in the other for sharpening. This knife could also be used to scratch out mistakes in the dried ink and hold down the parchment while writing so it wouldn't shift around. So because parchment is more durable than our paper, it could withstand some knife scratching if the scribe made a mistake and needs to scratch out something. Here on the left, we can see a medieval, bishop here, St. Dunstan. He's sort of an idealized scribe. I don't think St. Dunstan, dressed in his bishop apparel, would have been sitting down to write a manuscript, but because this is such a beautiful illuminated decoration here, it shows that his work was written down and in a beautiful book. So he is writing as a scribe in a very elaborate chair, and he's got a quill in one hand and a knife in the other. On the other side, you can see an image of a medieval monk, which is a little more accurate to who the scribes might be. He's also holding a quill in one hand and a knife in the other. And I want to draw your attention to the quill is in the right hand, and there's no feather on the end. And that is where all our movies are wrong. They wouldn't have big fluffy feathers in their faces as they're trying to write. They would have stripped off most, if not all of that to get it out of the way. They might have kept a little bit on the end. I've seen lots of examples of just a little bit of feather on the end to use for brushing something off the page. But it was not necessary to keep all those feathery bits. Just the shaft of the feather was the most important part. All right, now we'll get back here. Okay. So making black ink from medieval manuscripts was commonly made in 2 ways: carbon-based and iron gall ink. Black ink from antiquity was made from burnt organic material to make soot. The soot was mixed with water and tree gum to make a sticky texture, creating a black writing medium known as carbon black or lamp black. Lamp black and carbon-based inks don't adhere as well to parchment and can easily be smudged and removed, but they are very dark and do create a very nice black color. The other most common form of black ink in the Middle Ages was iron gall ink. This ink is made from tannic acid found in oak galls, which is a tree growth, mixed with iron sulfate and then combined with water. Later, a thickening gum was added, typically gum arabic, which is a dried acacia sap. Gum arabic also helps the ink adhere to the page. Iron gall ink darkens upon application and adheres to parchment much better than carbon-based inks. It's very slippery. I have written with iron gall ink before. It has a very different texture than modern synthetic ink, and you are able to buy it if you want to try it out. It's interesting. It definitely is a different experience than writing with synthetic black ink. Because of its iron properties, especially if it's improperly made, iron gall ink can be corrosive and peel from the page, as well as completely burn through parchment. It also commonly fades to brown over time, but it was often preferred over carbon-based ink because it's long-lasting. Iron gall ink was the standard choice for black ink in the Western world from around 600 all the way up into the 19th century. It's still sold today, as I mentioned before, so if you're curious to try it out. This image here is an image from the Huntington Library in California. They had an ink workshop. These little balls in this bowl are oak galls, which you crush and to get the tannic acid. And the yarn on the left is dyed with iron gall ink. So different purposes, not just writing, that you could use the ink for. Scribes used many natural minerals, animal, and plant materials to create pigments to decorate their manuscripts. Red ink was the most common used color for decoration, and often red ink was used as chapter headings, a way to highlight important text, and initials. As you can see on the left here, all of these red lines are the most important points of this calendar page. Red could be made in a variety of ways. In Europe, there's 5 different common ways to make a red pigment. Vermilion, which is found in the mineral cinnabar. It's poisonous, but it does create a very beautiful red color. And you will find a lot of medieval pigments are non-toxic. They are quite dangerous to work with. You should not inhale them. But vermilion is a very beautiful red here. On the right, you can see all the red in this image is all vermilion and very vivid. From a manuscript that is very old, it's still very bright. Brazil wood makes a darker red, and it's also it's naturally from the Brazil tree branches, and it's not used in English manuscripts, but it's found in French and Italian ones. Red ochre makes a bright red. It's a earth clay pigment, mainly iron oxide. Madder, which is a plant found in Europe, and this pigment is made from the roots. This one's very friendly. You can drink this as a tea if you like. Madder is much more friendly to work with. And then finally, my favorite is red lead, as you can imagine, also toxic. But red lead is very vibrant. On the bottom left image over here, this bright orange, this is red lead. It's also known as minium, and it is a brilliant color. I hope that you can someday see a red lead decorated manuscript in a museum, because it's fluorescent how bright it is. It's very beautiful. The other colors in here, the blue we'll talk about in a minute. The green is verdigris, which may turn colors as it oxidizes with time. So this is a pretty special manuscript that it has all these beautiful colors that still look great today. So blue pigment is the next most common for Western medieval manuscripts. There was a variety of ways to get different shades and intensities of blue. Lapis lazuli, which is ultramarine blue, a very vibrant, beautiful, bright blue, is naturally occurring metamorphic rock found in Afghanistan, Russia, and Chile. It was very commonly used all through Europe, and it was imported. England got most of their lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, so it was very expensive to import that. So on the right here, this bright blue of Mary's mantle and the sky, this is all lapis lazuli. Woad, which is a light blue and also where you can get a color similar to indigo, is a natural plant, very popular in England, made from the woad plant leaves. You could get this blue pigment, much safer to use and cheaper because it could just grow in your backyard. And then finally, azurite, which is a naturally occurring mineral from copper, very popular in England in the 13th century, and actually sort of ousted lapis lazuli as in popularity. It could be imported from Germany or France, and it is only moderately toxic, so a little safer than some of the other ones. On the left here is a detail from the Lindisfarne Gospels, which are pretty much agreed the second most beautiful manuscript in the British Isles. The scribe used blue pigment from the woad plant for this beautiful manuscript. This is a different blue than the one on the right. It's definitely just as vibrant and saturated, but a different shade of blue. So other colors I haven't really covered here, and we don't have time to cover all the colors, but purple could be made from mollusks. Green can be made from verdigris, as I mentioned before, but it goes brown. Also, the mineral malachite makes a beautiful green. I think that one's also a little bit poisonous. And yellow could be made from a variety of things. It's very hard to make a vibrant, bright yellow, but saffron is one of those natural ways to make a yellow pigment. So some manuscripts were even more elaborately decorated with gold and silver. This decoration is called illumination, from the Latin word illuminare, which means to light up or illuminate. Illuminated manuscripts would have been prohibitively expensive for almost all people and would have been owned by only the fabulously wealthy and religious institutions. Historically, the term illuminated was used only to describe manuscripts with gold and silver in them because they lit up the page. But now the term is more broadly used for any manuscripts with elaborate decoration, not just gold and silver. Gold was added to parchment in a variety of ways. The less expensive decoration was to make a gold paint, sometimes called shell gold, because it was kept in a little shell when you would dip into it with your brush. Another way to decorate with gold is to use gold leaf. This was the most expensive way to make gold decoration. A hammered wafer-thin piece of gold would be applied to the parchment on top of a sticky glue called gesso, which served as an adhesive to the page. And then the gold would be shaped into a letter or a decoration. It was then burnished or rubbed to make it shine very brightly. This was extremely delicate and difficult work, and gold and silver leaf decoration are only in the highest caliber of manuscripts. The far left is a beautiful example of a German illuminated manuscript written in Hebrew with gold letters and decorations, such as the King David's crown and his kinnor, which is a Hebrew lyre, and then all of the borders and animals. All of that yellow you see on the left is gold leaf, and the writing inside that red box is also gold leaf. The center image shows an elaborate use of gold paint. This is a 19th century Carolingian manuscript known as the Harley Golden Gospels, and for good reason. Many of these pages are covered in this gold paint. It's very beautiful, very elaborate. This is only a portion of a page covered in all this gold paint, but you can see it's a slight difference. It's not reflective the way gold leaf is, because gold paint is crushed up gold into a powder and then mixed to make paint. The far right image is an example of an inhabited initial, which means an initial with a person or an animal inside, decorated with silver leaf. This initial is of Michael the Archangel, and he's wearing armor. This is a 15th century Italian choir book, and both silver leaf and silver paint often end up looking like this, which is more of a black color, and some silver leaf looks actually black, not even gray anymore, because the metal oxidizes over time and just doesn't hold up the way gold does. So oftentimes it just looks very muddy and dark, not silver at all. Are there any other questions before we exit the materials section?
I think you're okay to move on. There are some questions, but I think we can grab some of them at the end.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, so now we've covered the basic materials for manuscript making. So now we're going to talk about who is doing all this work. Though there are medieval manuals for manuscript craftspeople, we are also shown how scribes were working and where they worked in the text that they created. They actually have descriptions and pictures for us in manuscripts. There are many images of scribes at work. They are often shown seated at the front of a desk holding a knife and quill, one in each hand, like we just discussed. On the left is an image of a hermit working on a manuscript. You can see his quill at work and his knife steadying his page as he copies the manuscript positioned above him, which is the exemplar. A horn inkwell is also part of his setup on the left, and he's working on an unbound sheet of parchment that has already been ruled, keeping it all in place with these bright red weights. Those are keeping all the parchment down. So starting around the 6th century, monks and nuns at religious institutions made up most of the scribes for manuscript making in medieval Europe. In the specially devoted rooms for scribal work, called scriptoria, scribes would toil over manuscripts made upon request by royalty, clergy, and the aristocracy. It was grueling and demanding work and required years of training, fine motor skills, excellent eyesight, and incredible expertise. Monastic scribal work would be delegated into tasks: prepare the parchment for writing, adding chalk, as we just mentioned, ruling the pages, copying the text, adding decoration and illumination, and also binding. Sometimes scribes filled multiple roles depending on their skills, their time constraints, and the size of the scriptorium workforce. So sometimes they had to be very handy and do more than one task, and sometimes they had enough people who were skilled at very specific things that they all sort of assembly lined it. I do one thing and then move it on to the next. In large books, there would be multiple scribes working on the text at the same time. So you can imagine how confusing it might be to try to do different sections of a book all at once, writing this all down, so making sure you have it all in one place, all in order. A 10th century scribe named Florentius Valoranica describes his work thus: because one who does not know how to write thinks it no labor, I will describe it for you. If you want to know how great of a burden is writing, it mists the eyes, it curves the back, it breaks the belly and ribs, it fills the kidneys with pain and the body with all kinds of suffering. Therefore, turn the pages slowly, dear reader, and keep your fingers well away from the pages. For just as a hailstorm ruins the fecundity of the soil, so the sloppy reader destroys the book and the writing. For as the last port is sweet to the sailor, so the last line to the scribe. A monastic scribe could work for at least 6 hours a day on a manuscript, and apparently the best scribes were even exempt from prayers to work longer on their books, even working by candlelight. Scribes sometimes aired their grievances at the back of their manuscripts in a short passage called the colophon, where they sometimes identified themselves, wrote the year, the day, and even the hour they may have finished the work, but they sometimes, the sneaky ones, sometimes add a little complaint about the work. For example, one scribe wrote, "Now I've written the whole thing. For Christ's sake, give me a drink." So by the 13th century, the monastic scriptoria evolved into secular workshops, and with professional artisans as master scribes and a training program for apprentices. Those monastic scriptoria did still exist in a limited capacity through the 16th century. Not all books, keep in mind though, not all books are religious or fantastically decorated, and in fact, the majority of books that have ever existed were not decorated at all and were very much practical, all text. And with the rise of universities, students and their teachers would also be copying texts for study in a much less regimented structure. Government and clerical scribes also have always existed, so they would have been employed to write and copy for a living, writing non-religious documents like charters and treaties and keeping ledgers and bound books of that kind. On the right is a rare image of a scriptorium with scribal pupils in training under the supervision of a woman, which I thought was pretty interesting to see the woman as head of the scriptorium and training her pupils. This image was taken from Christine de Pizan's Book of the Queen, which is from the early 15th century. Women have always worked as scribes, and there's evidence of female scribes throughout history. The European medieval period has many examples of women working as scribes and illuminators. These images are of two female authors working as scribes, Marie de France, a 12th century poet, and Christine de Pizan, the renowned Venetian poet, novelist, biographer, and literary scholar from the 1400s. There are many historical examples of female religious institutions with documented scriptoria, but these scriptoria would have worked on the same material as male monastic scribes. So there's a lot of difficulty in discerning the gender of a scribe who wrote a text. The most obvious and reliable way to identify a scribe is in the text of the colophon, where the scribe may leave their name or details about themselves. For example, in Isidore of Seville's Etymology and the Nature of Things, 8 female scribes from a Benedictine nunnery in Belgium Belgium are attributed to the note at the end of the manuscript. The colophon listed all 8 of the names of the women, and then it reads, "Indeed, they wrote for those in charge of the monastery that they might ask God for them to free them from punishment and establish them in paradise. May whoever steals this book from them be cursed." In the late medieval period, more female scribes and authors are more well known and attributed to works. So with more documentation and more literacy comes more female authors and scribes. There are more books with female pronouns. There are also books with female pronouns written in them, perhaps indicating they were meant for female owners. So now we've learned about the materials and we've learned about the scribes making the materials. So let's look at some medieval manuscripts. Was there any other questions before we exit the presentation?
There's some we can get them later though. I want to get to these manuscripts. I know other people do as well, but I've got a list of all the questions that will kind of true up.
All right, sounds good. All right, so here's the first document we're going to look at today. This is a medical and herbal manuscript written in the 10th century in southern Italy. It is a compendium. It contains many different brief medical epistles, treatises, and recipes, all from around the same period or slightly later. It's written in Latin on parchment, and it's 76 pages long. I chose this manuscript because it's an excellent example about how manuscripts were used and changed with owners and over time. There's so many different types of handwriting and crossing out and notes all over this. It was very well used, and it's important to remember that most manuscripts wouldn't be the beautiful ones we see in museums, but would be ones like this, which are mostly just text and then people thinking of something they want to share with their colleague or their own ideas, or, oh, this recipe's good, I want to mark this for later. All of these are living, breathing texts that change with every owner. So I'm going to zoom in a little to the top here so we can get a better look. We have a beautiful initial here. It's starting to fade. Forgive it. It's from the year 900. It is green in here, and then we have some red and some yellow. This is a Q. It's got a hook through it, but this is a letter Q. And then along the top here, this looks slightly different. This is a 17th century owner wrote his name on the top. This is Thomas Potter's name. We have evidence that he owned this book and he wrote his name on the first page in the front. And as we go down, we can see lots of notes on the side. And some of these notes are about the 4 humors. The 4 humors are a historical medical practice based on the belief that the human body was regulated by 4 humors or chemical systems: black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. So we can see examples of this where the person who was reading this book wrote these notes on the sides. Sanguis is blood, phlegma, that's phlegm, and then we have black bile over here. This is black bile listed over here. And as we go down, we can see this page has been well worn. This is the first page of the book, so it would have had the most exposure. It probably got a lot more use, so it's a lot darker. So it's in general in worse shape than the pages behind it. But in general, this text was very well used. So it has a lot of stains and tears and all kinds of evidence of that use. We have another owner down here. Joseph Banks wrote his name in the, I think this is the 18th century owner. And more notes over here. Caput means your head. We have stomach. This is abdomen and bladder. So these are all medical treatments for these things, all pulled out to the side for easy access as you're reading your book. And as I go through these pages, we're going to look at a few pages from a few manuscripts, and I will take a couple moments if you have questions about in an individual page as well. You can write in a question, because I feel like in the moment you might think of something that is curious to you. So we'll flip to the next one, but if you have questions, yes, Kevin will catch them for me. All right, so here's the next page I wanted to look at. This is a little bit brighter. It's been hidden a little more from sunlight and exposure. And the reason I wanted to show you this page is this curve right here. So after we get a full view of this image, we're going to zoom in. This is an example of how parchment is imperfect. So we'll zoom out a little more so you get a more scale idea. So this piece of parchment had a little bit of imperfection in its rectangular shape. And so this happens whenever you're using maybe the back or the front of the animal skin, and maybe this is where the neck was cut out or one of the limbs. And these curves are really common, and especially in books like this, which were for a lot of use, it would have not been a big deal to use this and just write around it. And you can see how the notes are just written on the side instead of worrying about, oh, this piece is missing. So here is the next one I wanted to look at. I'm going to zoom in once, and we are going to take a look at something I discussed in the lecture over here on the left. So this is evidence of pricking. So this pricking, and we can go very far in thanks to the British Library excellent scans that they have. These pricks are not very circular. They're kind of slits almost. This was probably made with a knife. It's not as precise, and so these pricks are all the way down. And as you might expect, with time, these pages get trimmed for new bindings, and so the pricking may eventually disappear depending on who's binding it. And the other thing I want to mention about this page are these faint lines going down here, and this is evidence of ruling. This ruling would have been with a lead point. Very faint. It was probably a lot darker when this was initially made, but helps keep that text block in line. And then the final thing on this page I want to talk about is this guy right here, this perfect circular hole. So this is a wormhole. So everything you've heard about a bookworm is true. Bookworms did exist, and they love eating parchment, and they love eating wooden covers for books. So many medieval books have wormholes that go all the way through them, even through the covers. They're usually really perfect circles as the worm made its way through and then on to the next one. So it's evidence of this being very organic, and you really had to protect parchment from decay and pests because some pests thought of parchment as a tasty snack. All right, our last image from this manuscript is right here. So this looks quite different, and that's because I mentioned that this manuscript is a compendium. It has multiple works inside of it, and this one was written around the same time, but by a different scribe. We'll zoom in just a little so we can get a better view. Totally different in terms of handwriting. These initials down the side, very different. We have a red color scheme, and we had sort of a green one with the other ones. This is a very different style. It all got compiled at some point together. This section is about herbal remedies, and we can see this beautiful line drawing here of an herb of some sort, depending on what the text is referring to. And as we go down, see another herbal drawing here. And you can see more pricking on this page in the back. Actually, you can see pricking here too. So two last things on this page. I'm going to zoom in a little bit farther. So very faintly here, can you see these lines, these parallel lines? This is dry point. So this is what ruling looks like if you use just a dry point, not a lead point. And what I mean by dry point is you're pushing a knife or a sharp object, making an indent into the parchment. And this is how you would make a more invisible type of ruling. It's not necessarily one is better than the other, but it was just a practice. Some people use dry point, some people use lead point, and this is evidence that this particular scribe used dry point in his manuscript. And you can see it comes straight from the pricking, so it's very obvious that these prick lines went straight into the ruling process. And then the final thing on this page is very small. These down here. This is somebody practicing their alphabet. Somebody is practicing writing with their pen. Sometimes these are called pen trials, where you're just you're just putting a bunch of lines, making sure your quill works. They also could have just been doodling some letters down here, but these are multiple P's and some S's. I can see a C and a D over here. So these are just doodling around, just messing around with the quill. Um, Kevin is disgusted. These manuscripts were not sacred objects. They were to be used, and people did draw all over them, especially one like this, which was meant to be noted and commentated on.
So it looks like they make comments in both margins, right? The gutter in the middle and pretty much anywhere. It looks
Yeah,
like.
pretty much anywhere. It just depends where there is space. This one has a very narrow gutter over here, but this wouldn't have been as an expensive book because it only has two colors. That's one way to tell how expensive it is, just black and red. And yeah, the margins are kind of all over the place. This one especially doesn't have any kind of regimented spacing for text, so it's kind of a free-for-all of where you want to put your notes.
Great.
All right, if there's no more questions on this particular manuscript, we're going to skip to the next one.
Skip ahead. Yep.
All right, so here's our next manuscript. This is a bestiary. Bestiaries were medieval compendiums of both real and mythical animals. The text usually includes a natural history and illustration of each animal, along with a moral lesson. These books were very popular in the Middle Ages, especially in the 12th century when this one was made, or maybe this a little bit later, in Western Europe, very popular. The animals included were organized by type, sometimes categorized as beasts, birds, and reptiles. Very vague, not quite as strict as we are now with our scientific categories. Though it is debated, some historians believe medieval people did not necessarily believe all these creatures really existed, but they had moral lessons that were attached to them, and these lessons were important enough to include them alongside real animals because there's so much symbolism in animal likenesses and stories. This bestiary is known as the Rochester Bestiary. It was made in the 12th century in southeast England, possibly Rochester, where it gets its name. It's written in Latin and Old French in a Gothic style script and is 152 pages. This is our first page I wanted to review with you. We have a beautiful first page initial. This is a foliate initial B. It's called foliate because it's made out of like foliage or vines. It's supposed to look kind of natural. And it's also classified as interlacing because all of those vines are woven together in sort of maybe like a Celtic or Irish style. We might connect that to that style of interlacing. This also is an example of gold leaf. As we slide down a little bit, all this dark yellow, this is all gold. I'm not sure if it's gold leaf or gold paint. My guess it is gold leaf because it looks very smooth and clear. And down here, this definitely looks like gold leaf to me. This letter H, this is all in gold. So this one is not as worn all the way through, but it's very obvious where it is worn. So we have on the corners here, and then all the way down to this bottom corner. And this is from use. Especially, like I mentioned, the first page would get a lot of exposure, but a lot of humans turned a lot of these pages with their oily hands. And so these corners are especially worn and fragile, very fragile, because of the oils and the dirt on people's hands. And then finally down here at the bottom, we have this beautiful red stamp. So this is unfortunately a practice that used to be very common. This is from the British Museum, probably in the 19th or 20th century. Hopefully not too late in the 20th century. The British Museum, as an anti-theft device, would take a red stamp and stamp it into the middle of some of these manuscripts because it kept people from stealing the beautiful parchment leaves. Unfortunately, it does take away from the grandeur of the decoration, but it is with good intention, at least, to keep it in the museum. So I do want to point out, since I'm talking about oils on the hands, that when you handle manuscripts, for most of the world at this point, it has been decided you don't wear gloves. So whenever you're actually able to hold a manuscript or turn the pages, it's more accepted to have clean hands, because most of the oils from your hands come from touching your face. That if you wash your hands and then go visit a reading room and look at a rare book or a manuscript, clean hands are safe to handle parchment. Gloves are usually for artifacts like stone and wood, and photographs, and kind of celluloid like that. Just so you know, when you see white gloves in movies, that's not the practice anymore. Okay, we are going to take a look at some animals in our bestiary. So here's our first one. This is a lion. I really like this little guy. He is hiding in the plants, despite him being the king of the jungle. And I love his claws. They're very elaborate. And he's also got some little fun companions with him. I zoomed in a little too close here. So here is our lion. Some birds in the trees here in this bright green border. It's very pretty. And if we look to the side, we can see some ruling over here as well. Next, we have a panther, and this is my favorite because he looks like he's wearing a little sweater. I'm not sure why they made the panther so colorful, but he is very unique. And he's got some antelope friends on the side. And then also this incredible lion or dragon type figure who's sticking his head in a hole and then coming out the other side. There's all kinds of little figures in medieval decoration that are fun to study in detail. Also, we have ruling on the sides here, and at the bottom of this page, we can see some more imperfect parchment. This page also has a great example of parchment texture. So brace yourself. I'm going to zoom in really far. Don't get dizzy. Can we see all these little dots? This is evidence of skin. So this is parchment. This is animal skin. And all these dots would be the follicle holes. And this is just, it shows up when there's dirt on top of it. So the middle of the page is much more white and clean. And then the outsides that have gotten more dirty have filled those holes with dirt. And so it's much more obvious to see the follicle holes.
Does this manuscript have a name that we're looking at?
Yes, this is the Rochester Bestiary.
That's what I thought. We're still on the Rochester Bestiary.
Yes, this is entirely digitized on the British Library website if you want to actually go through the whole thing. There's all kinds of fun animals in it. Let's see. We've got a couple more pages. So here's a unicorn here being slayed by this knight. And the reason I picked this page, the unicorn is very cool, yes, but I also wanted to show you a very common practice in manuscript making on this page. So you can see this gold leaf L. We can see a little bitty L over here. So this is called a guide letter. And when the scribe put in the text, he knew that there was supposed to be an L decoration here, but it wasn't there yet. And it's not like the scribe would sit down with the illuminator and take time to go through and make sure they did all the right things. So this is sort of like a guidepost for the illuminator to know the L is supposed to go here. So you made a little bitty L on the side. Sometimes they put it underneath so you can't even see it. But this one, in this case, maybe he didn't know how big it was going to be, so he just wrote it on the side. There's lots of guide letters still visible in manuscript, so it doesn't seem to be a huge problem if it was still there. But that's how they knew which initial to add, because some scribes were not literate. Some scribes weren't literate in Latin. So you might know some reading, you might know some of what you're writing, but you definitely could use the help whenever you're trying to figure out what goes on the page as quickly and as precisely as possible. All right, so we are going to look at one more on this manuscript. Here's my other favorite one. I love medieval elephants. It is very clear to me that the person who made this did not know what an elephant looked like and had read about what an elephant looked like. A lot of times, medieval animals were drawn from a description, and sometimes those descriptions were a little bit exaggerated in some way or another for fanciful effect, and so some drawings are very inaccurate. We can see what they're going for here, even though they don't look entirely like this shape. We got the tusks in the trunk, we got it. So this elephant has a castle on its back, which is being attacked, and so we have a whole invasion scene going on here, and I love that the elephants are part of this scene. It's very cool. Oh, also, I have one last one because I was told that this crocodile is very funny. So we were including the crocodile because he doesn't really look like he's having a very good time. And I really enjoyed the crocodile image in this picture. All right, so that's our bestiary. Were there questions about the bestiary?
No, there are comments about some stuff that aren't specifically about any of these pages, so we can get to those at the end too.
Sounds good. All right.
People do like that crocodile though.
It's a great crocodile. I do recommend going back and taking a look at that manuscript. There's all kinds of fun things in there. All right, so our last manuscript, I've saved the most beautiful for last, of course. This is a book of hours. Let me get this window set up. All right, so the last manuscript we're going to look at today is a book of hours made in Utrecht in the Netherlands around 1440. Books of hours were devotional prayer books that were made for personal prayer. They were immensely popular from the 12th to 16th century, and the most elaborate and beautifully decorated books were commissioned for the upper classes and for royalty. They owned these books for prayers, of course, but also as a status and devotional symbol of their piety. Books of hours include psalms, hymns, scripture, and prayers to the saints. The text is usually divided into 8 daily prayers comprised of those components I just mentioned. These hours are called Hours of the Virgin, prayed to the Virgin Mary, along with a calendar, prayers to saints, and additional prayers. Because this was a book only by commission, the future owner could request anything in their prayer book. So if they had a certain devotion to a specific saint or they liked a certain prayer, they could add this to their book. It was very customizable. The hours we're looking at today are the Hours of Kathryn of Cleves, a 15th century manuscript that is considered the most beautiful Dutch illuminated manuscript ever made. And I think the evidence is right here before you. On the left, Duchess Kathryn herself is kneeling in prayer to St. Mary and holding her book of hours in her hands. So she's holding the book that we're holding. It's kind of a cool experience to see her in action with her book. The arms of the Duchess, which you can see her coat of arms down here, is in the most important position right underneath the Virgin Mary's feet. In an act of independence and defiance, Kathryn's arms are resting on top here. This red ox is her house of Cleves, not her husband's house. So it is an act of independence on Duchess Kathryn's part that she would have her own book with her own family's arms instead of her husband's. And then underneath this are her family's arms as well, her mother's noble family and her father's as well, I think. Yes, this is Lamarck arms. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. This image is very busy. There's a lot of things going on in here, and we're going to start at, We're going to start at the top, there we go, and admire some of these angels. So angels are playing here for Mary, and they have these beautiful wings. These are probably malachite or verdigris green wings, and these very bright orange are definitely that minium that we talked about, that red lead. And then these very vivid red ox here, and these shields with her heraldry symbols. And then we can scroll down a little bit, and we see all of this gold. This is all gold leaf, and some of it's starting to chip away. You can see this is starting to fade a little bit. And all of these little pieces in here, these are all gold, all these individual little dots of gold. This is called ivy rinceau, and it's supposed to emulate ivy. And it can be full of all kinds of other things too. We have little flowers and an owl over here, which was probably some kind of symbol to Kathryn. And here we have the Duchess herself in her 1440s clothing, which is very beautiful, this beautiful headdress. And she's holding a book with a message coming out of the top of it. And then we have these very, very detailed heraldry symbols of her mother's and her father's houses down here. So on the right side of the page, which might be even more busy than the left side, we can see all kinds of things happening. I've only found some details to mean things, and others are purely seemingly decorative. But this is Joachim, St. Joachim, the father of Mary. So he is being told by this angel in this amazing bright orange mantle that his wife is pregnant with Mary. So this is before Jesus is born. This is the conception of Mary. And I also really love that these biblical scenes depicted in medieval manuscripts have biblical don't have biblical environments behind them. They are medieval environments. So someone in a biblical and possibly even a medieval outfit might be backed by a castle or something that's totally not the time period that the Bible would have been written. So they are making the stories very current and very relevant to the reader by having them set in the time they were living. So we have more of these heraldry symbols all the way down, and this orange and blue acanthus leaves, very decorative down here, more acanthus down here. And we have where's this rabbit? I know there's up here. So the rabbit represents fertility, and that is connected to the story of the conception of Mary, that fertility is something that Joachim is very old, so he didn't expect to have a child, and then he is presented with this news, which is very exciting. So, all right, so that is the Hours of the Virgin for Kathryn of Cleves. So, yeah.
Question: what is the size? What are the dimensions of this?
Very small. So this is, I think this is 8 inches by 6 inches. Books of Hours are very portable for good reason. They are you should be able to bring them to Mass with you. It should be able to fit in a bag or a pocket. This one might be a little bit bigger. I haven't seen this in person, so I can't quite visualize it versus others. But all Books of Hours are quite small, and this one's no exception with 8 inches or so. It's a pretty small sized book. It's a good question. It's really important if you're doing manuscript research or looking at a book online, look at the dimensions, because that's going to also tell you a lot about where it was kept, why it was made. If you have a huge book, it might have been on display. Some books, like musical notation books, would have been set on an altar. Or set up for the choir to look at, or maybe something presented on an altar. So size is really important when you're talking about medieval manuscript design. This Books of Hours are an excellent example of that. All right, we have one more image to look at. And this is also from Kathryn of Cleves' Book of Hours. This is a medieval calendar. Medieval calendars were very common in Books of Hours. Almost exclusively they were put in Books of Hours. I don't know if I've even seen a Book of Hours without a calendar. It's very typical, and that's so you can make sure you're keeping track of your prayers and your feast days. So a medieval calendar is very flexible. It's not like our calendar, which changes every year. We got to print a new one. So they developed a method so you could keep the same calendar and just change the days. So if you look at this, notice maybe that there's no numbers, because that day will change. That day of the week will change. So it's I think there's 3 points to figuring it out, and we don't have the time for me to really explain it in full, but it is kind of complicated how they figured out how to have a stationary calendar that you could just apply every year. So on this page, excellent example of lead point ruled lines. You can see they're all the way across each page. And this is one of the finest manuscripts that's ever been made. And it's got these dark lines through it. I think at first, when I first started studying manuscripts, I was really shocked by this, but now it's just sort of normal. It's just like the guidelines to make a good book. You can also see on this side the design coming through the other side, which tells you how thin this parchment is. This is the finest quality parchment. It's really, really thin. It's like tissue paper. It's not weak like tissue paper is. It doesn't bend like that, but it's super transparent. So you still have to be very delicate when you turn these pages. But yes, it is. You can actually see the color through the other side. On this side, this is the calendar for December. We have K and L here. That stands for calends, and that's the beginning of the calendar. And this border that goes all the way down, this is all gold leaf. So we're going to zoom in a little and take a look at this a little bit closer. So we have red here, and this designates December Haber Dies 31 Luna 30. So it has 31 days and 30 nights. And then we have feast days on every line here. So we have Barbara, Virgin here. So St. Barbara, we have St. Nicholas, because we are in December here. This Episcopi means Bishop Nicholas. We have Conception of Mary. We have a couple down here. Yeah, more bishops this way, Episcopi. So we have the black ones aren't as important and the red ones are really important. And then we have some days that don't have anything on them, but because we're Kathryn of Cleves and we can't have a single plain part of a book this beautiful, she puts in bar fillers. So these are blue and gold leaf bar fillers that are decorated with gold for every single blank line, and even lines that don't go all the way to the end, we put a little bit of bar in here just to make it extra beautiful. So if there's any questions specifically about the calendar, I'll leave this up for just another second or so.
There's no questions. There's lots of fun conversation happening.
Good, that's great.
People are reading it and making comments.
I have to admit, I do pick this page because St. Kathryn is on this page and she's my saint. So over here on the left, here's Kathryn Virgin. This is St. Kathryn. So I always use this page. But all of the pages in this calendar look as beautiful as this one. This one I just picked because that's my name, but they are all this gorgeous. And this is all on the Morgan Library website. This whole book is digitized if you want to look at all of these amazing pages.
There is a Barbara in the audience, and she.
Oh, good.
She noted the Barbara. What was that little creature on top? Did you talk about that?
Oh, nope, that's the wrong one. We could talk about that one too.
Now you can't.
The little creature on top. I didn't talk about that. Let's zoom in. I don't know if I know what that is.
Yeah, it's weird.
Oh, so here's the mouth. Here's the nose and the eye. I don't know what's going on with this guy. Looks kind of like a dragon. There's a lot of nondescript animals of whatever you'd like them to be, wrapped around foliage, wrapped around these are called acanthus leaves. Yeah, I'm not sure if I could confidently identify this. I think there's a wing here too, so I'm not quite sure what that is.
Yeah, someone asked about, is there like a rule or like guidelines of which animal species were used for different things or in different parts?
In calendars, yeah, actually, there's not rules, but calendars often use zodiac symbols in the months because they correspond to the months or seasons. This calendar doesn't have those motifs, but many calendars have times of the year represented all the way around in a border. So maybe in the fall, in like September, October, they show the peasants harvesting their crops, and maybe in the spring they show more flowers and things starting to grow. And they have all of those zodiac symbols as well, because it was all very connected and very recognizable. So if you have these images that are really easy to understand and follow, even if you're not quite literate or you're not really comfortable reading any Latin, and you probably would if you had a book like this, but a more accessible book, maybe less so. So there are pictures used as guidelines too, and it's not incorrect to say that royal ladies or aristocratic ladies would be expected to be completely literate. Some were more educated than others. So pictures really do help you find the prayers you want and to follow along when you need a little more help with reading.
Yeah, great. Is there something else you're showing us, or should we ask some questions?
I think I've run out of time. I had one more image.
Well, usually by now we're definitely over time. We're about a quarter after, right? 6:15, but that's fine. People can leave when they've had enough, or have something else to go to. But we still have quite a number of people here. So if you do have some questions or comments and you want to put them up in the chat and the Q&A, now would be a great time to do that. I'm hunting through them now for a couple of questions that I said we'd come back to. And there were some questions about the silver that was being used because it was tarnished or turning black. And is that able to be restored, or is that really just gone forever? Like what?
I doubt, because it's so thin, I would really doubt that you could salvage what's there. I don't know. Restoration is a very delicate process. That's probably a better question for a conservator. But I have my doubts that you'd be able to restore something so thin and delicate, but it's possible. I'm not sure with regards to the oxidizing process, because some of it's quite black and it's pretty shocking. You think, why is all this black in here? It looks very wrong, but yeah, it used to be bright silver.
That's too bad. There are also some, I guess, question. Well, why red? Why was red kind of the go-to? Was it the easiest to make or the most eye-catching?
I don't know if I've read a direct reason why. My theory would probably be that it's very different than the ink itself, than black ink. It really shows off contrast. Right. So I mean, I talked about the different types of red. So there's many different ways to make red, and some very local and plant-based, some a little more dangerous and imported. But all in all, red could be achieved very easily through a lot of different resources, and it was a very obvious highlighter in a book. You saw those red lines in the calendar. They really catch your eye, and I don't think blue or green or and orange, the red lead would have been too much effort to write in a red lead like that. You would need more of an ink consistency. So I think red really checks all those boxes in terms of accessibility and visibility.
Yeah, I can see that. The contrast, it just catches your eye, and that's what you want. If you only have two colors to choose from, right, you're gonna
Right. The black ink and red is very, very common, and then blue follows that. And oftentimes blue and red pen work are sort of intertwined, and they use a blue letter with red design and a red letter with blue design. And they sort of interchange those because in prayer books, you can get lost in all of the black text. And using those red and blue letters alternating, you can remember, oh, I was on a blue one, oh, I was on a red one, and that helps you keep track too, because there was a lot of your eyes swimming through this Gothic text, being sort of lost in how illegible it really is.
So you mentioned how toxic some of these inks were. Did they know at the time that they were toxic, or do we just know that now?
I'm not sure. I guess it just depends on the chemical. I think lead has been used in a lot of things over time, and we're still finding out what lead can do to people. Lead has been used in makeup. It's been used in plates and cups and all kinds of things. And very recently, I mean, there's lead in pipes, and we're still trying to get lead out of our things. So I think it was just sort of acceptable. I don't think they were eating it, but I think they didn't realize how things can be absorbed in the skin and how it could damage your lungs. I don't think that they were as concerned with the toxicity of some of that stuff, but I think also they were probably aware that grinding up minerals and then inhaling them is probably bad for you, but I don't know if they knew what degree they specifically each thing was how toxic each one was. But yeah, somebody mentioned Mad Hatter. Yeah, hat makers used to use mercury when they made hats, and
Yeah.
mercury will slowly make you go crazy.
Well, I mean, lead in paint has been
Right, yes.
lead is everywhere. So
Yeah, and like arsenic to make green, very common green component, and turns out a terrible idea, especially for dyeing clothing in green.
yeah, yeah, right up against your skin. So everybody loves a good bookworm mention in a story. So
I know how to cater to my audience.
thanks for getting that in there.
Oh
Do they
no,
eat
Grendel is licking her lead type. Grendel, don't lick your lead type. I took a class, and Grendel was one of my um, instructors, so I do know that she does work with lead type. Don't do it.
Many printers are working, still have lead type. There's many comments about Grendel's comments in the chat. I will send them to you. They're quite
I
hysterical.
can't wait to read them. I'm excited.
We could just do a program about her comments.
I would totally attend that. That would be fantastic.
So are bookworms eating everything? Paper, like parchment, like book covers, leather? What are they
Sorry,
eating?
what was the question?
What are bookworms eating? Do they eat everything?
Oh, I mean anything organic. So the leather, the wood, the parchment. I think anything, yeah, anything that can really rot, the pests are going to find their way into it. There's other types of bugs that you have to watch for too. It's just it's difficult to keep those pests out in a medieval library. You have to keep things out of the sun. You have to keep things out of the damp. Parchment really reacts poorly to moisture. It starts to warp. You can see books that have been damaged by moisture. Parchment is really, really wavy, and parchment grows and shrinks with temperature too, and with humidity, because it is organic material. So there is some you need to have some kind of allowance for that when you store things. But now parchment is kept best at a specific conservation happy temperature basically in a refrigerator in an archive, and that's the way it can last as long as possible and stay stable.
Right.
But it's still very, very durable. It's very impressive how I've handled books that were over 1,000 years old, and have been very surprised at how well they've held up.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I got a couple more comments to make and a question or two, but we are going to wrap up because it's
sure. I know we can talk about this all night.
I might actually call you tomorrow and ask you some more questions.
I would love that. Let's talk about bookworms.
So I'm hoping you can send me the quote, it missed the eyes, it curves the back quote, because people love that, and I can send that out to everyone who really wants the full quote for that.
Absolutely.
But there's also
lots of quotes of complaining scribes. They're all really funny. I definitely recommend going down that wormhole.
Yeah.
All of their complaints.
The same for the scribe who wrote in the colophon about how he needs a drink. Like,
I know.
Is it? Do you know what book that's in, or is that just one of those tales?
Let me see. I don't know if I have the source on my notes, but I do. Greenblatt, 2011. I'd have to look up the book that corresponds to that, but okay. I can include that too.
Okay, that's great because people are interested in that. But some people made a comment every time we have a presentation where we talk about scribes. People are fascinated with scribes, like who becomes a scribe, how are you trained, like all of that kind of stuff. And to see all of the women scribes, and you're like, oh yeah, there's lots of illustrations of women scribes. That was so unusual. I've never seen that in a presentation before.
It might be dangerous to say there's lots of them, but there's definitely a significant number. Like, they do exist. There is a percentage. And especially in religious institutions that are segregated by sex, there's going to be, if they want to make commissions, if they want to make religious books for their own institution, they're going to learn how to do it themselves. So yeah, there's lots of communities that did that, male and female. And yeah, I think there's like a very antiquated rhetoric that scribes are all men, and that's definitely not the case. And now we have lots of documentation to back that up.
Yeah, it's crazy. When you said monks and nuns, I was like, what?
Oh yeah, nuns? There's nuns who print as well. There's lots. There's evidence of printing nuns, and I love those sources about the printing press at a nunnery.
Yeah, maybe we'll have you back and do a.
Oh yeah, we can do a whole early modern book set. Grundle will help me with that though. She's very knowledgeable.
So who did those illustrations of scribes, right? Who does an illustration of a scribe? That seems so.
Well, the ones that I showed you, the ones of Saint Dunstan, and the monk, like those are just in religious books. So that's just part of the illuminator's job. So I guess they're like drawing a picture of themselves essentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of them are not necessarily people who were scribes, but evangelists. So evangelists wrote the gospels. So there's lots of images of them as a scribe.
Got it.
So in that, like that St. Dunstan image, which was all gold and he's dressed as a bishop, but he's working as a scribe. So it's showing him writing his material. And the same thing with the evangelists. A lot of gospels have the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as scribes pictured at the beginning of the gospel.
That's part of the storytelling. Yeah.
Somebody's on the Morgan website that I was on. They found the picture that I showed but didn't get to talk about with the mouth.
Yeah.
It's another good one. I would do a whole event just on Kathryn of Cleves' hours because they're so interesting.
Yeah, I thought we would get off track if I brought that up during the thing.
Yeah. Never enough time.
So there, and now the last question we'll talk about is, I guess, the scribes who did the initial letters, right? The really beautiful initial letters or rubrification in the manuscripts. Like, was that a special person who did those, or was just any scribe was also doing those?
I would say that illuminators are probably trained pretty differently than a text scribe would be, because a scribe doing text had to really be trained to make those uniform, beautiful letters. It took a very long time, and it seems like a totally different craft than illumination and decoration and working with pigments and painting. Yeah. And whenever art historians describe these like beautiful images from the books of hours, they call them paintings because it is a type of art. So I would say that's usually a very different person from the person who did the text to the person who did all the color and the gold.
Can you repeat the name of the saint of Kathryn of Cleves page? The saint. Oh, the name of the saint in the Kathryn of Cleves page.
Oh, the name of the saint. Do you mean in the, like, what page the calendar was on?
Yeah. Is there any chance you
could
repeat the name of the saint in the Kathryn of Cleves page?
The first page was Saint Mary that she was praying to. That's the first page of that book of hours. It's the most elaborate page. The calendar page is I don't have that folio number offhand, but it's in that Morgan Library website.
Collection of Kathryn.
Yeah, there's a whole thumbnail grid of all of the pictures, all the digitized pictures. So you can pick it out if you want to find that calendar page. It's December, so you should be able to find that.
Great. Let's see. We really see. We could do.
Oh, I see. The saint opposite of Saint Mary and Kathryn.
Oh,
okay. On the other side is Joachim, Mary's father.
Oh, got it. I'm glad you were looking at that chat. I hadn't scrolled down. I hadn't scrolled down that far.
I hope I answered the question.
Like, wait a minute, there's more here. Great. Well, any last comments you want to make before we wrap up? Because this has been, everybody is going to get an email tomorrow with Kathryn's website, and you can contact her. She'd probably love to hear from the many of you who are here. Such a lively discussion. People were really interested in this. Lots of comments happening. I will, of course, send you, Kathryn, all of the chat and the Q&A so you can see who is here. And then if you want to get back to folks or answer questions directly, you're more than welcome to do that. And you can see all of the great congratulations and the bravos that are in the chat and the Q&A. Wow. Some people weren't able to stay this long. So early on, there's lots of thank yous. This is terrific.
Well, I have to say thank you so much for having me. This was such a joy. I love talking about this, and I'm glad everyone was so interested. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, great. Well, so we will wrap up. I'm going to thank you again. Thank you, Kathryn. This was terrific. So exciting. I have 4 pages of notes. Usually I have like 1 or 2. 4 pages of things I got to talk to you
That's
about.
amazing.
And thank you everyone for joining us for this Book Club of California program tonight. Please join us for our next online program titled Phoebe Apperson Hearst, A Life of Power and Politics. That's going to be Monday, March 21st at 6 p.m., an hour later than today, because it is both an in-person and virtual event. So if you're interested in joining us in person here at the book club for that, please do. But you can also join us here on Zoom. It's going to be a presentation by author and professor of history at City College of San Francisco, Alexandra Nicholas. And you can register for that event online at bccbooks.org/programs, or using the weekly email that you get from us, our programs email that you're probably receiving from the book club. So again, thank you, Kathryn. Thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you had a wonderful evening, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Be well and take care of yourself. Thank you. Bye, Kathryn.